Welcome back to the program. You're still on Good Morning Kenya. We continue pace with the day's conversation. Time for our last conversation this Monday morning. Our focus on matters family check, centered on just policy, planning, and re-strategizing the education sector. This is what forms the basis of our conversation this morning. My guests are here to help us converse around this particular topic in the next 40 minutes or so. To my extreme left, that is Dr. Rosa, who is the founder, Sochin Research Institute and Core Academy. Right next to her is Mr. Noah Miller, who is equally the founder, Sochin Research Institute and Core Academy. Perhaps I can begin with you, Dr. Rosa, just to help us understand about Sochin Research Institute, when it was formed, the idea and the mandate of it.
So the idea was we felt the need to have a think tank and a trust-based institute in Kenya, but not just for the Kenya purpose, for the global South, for the purpose of instilling the social scientific inquiry to investigate the policy-related issues. So that's pretty much the brief about our institute. Yes.
Okay. Which year was this?
2017.
2017.
Yes.
So sort of 5 years since when it was established. Mr. Miller, 5 years later, in your own analysis, would you say that the gaps in which this institute was established to mitigate has actually served its purpose?
I think we're slowly seeing some progress. So one key feature of the Sochin Research Institute is that it's data-driven. We very much focus on evidence-based research, and we are slowly seeing more data come to Kenya, although I think there's still a need for more data and more transparency. And I think that data is crucially important to make decisions. Without proper data, you don't know the situation properly, you can't plan, and you can't measure the beginning state with the end state. So I hope there'll be more data, especially in the education sector, so you can make proper policy decisions.
I like that. More data to see how best you could make changes in the policy in terms of our education sector. And actually, even as we progressively move with this conversation, we'll be touching on the issue of data, internet, technology, and see how we can work around that. But now, coming back home to this particular conversation, I understand that yes, the task force is still underway in terms of reviewing the the education system. But again, let me just pick your brain on this one. Did we really need an overhaul in our education sector?
There seems to be a lot of confusion about the CBC and where it came from, how it's being implemented. And I think you have to always revisit systems and policies and constantly improve. So I think there was a need to maybe update the Kenyan education system and align it with international best practices, all the while considering local practices as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to have a side-by-side comparison and align international best practices with local best practices, because after all, Kenya is the leading nation in East Africa, and education is the way that advantage will be ensured going forward. And you can't lag behind on education and somehow miss out on future trends, technology, build up the right industries. So I think you always have to have a reform and an investigation of where we are. And my hope is that the task force reaches the right conclusions and puts Kenya education on the right track. So basically what I'm getting from you is that it was necessary. There was a need to actually transit from what was to what is currently being reviewed at the moment. I think you have to modernize a system that is very much focused in the past on rote memorization, on assessments, and doesn't align with the critical skills students need to have for future career paths. And unfortunately, maybe some time was lost because there was a lot of questioning about the CBC. The implementation was, I think, a little bit postponed or slowed down. So I think now is the perfect time to have a reset. With a new government in place, now's the time to look at things, to get it right, and then implement quickly.
I hear you. Dr. Rosa, do you share the same idea? Mr. Miller says that indeed it was time for us to update our education system, just alluded to Kenya being one of those countries in Eastern Africa, so clearly one of those important things to be focusing on. What are your views on this one?
Totally agree with Mr. Miller on that issue, and a lot of, I'm sure the Kenyan parents and the educators and politicians in the education field, the education specialists, whether it's private or public, they've been going through a lot of turmoil. Within the last few years, we had a coronavirus, so we had a lot of external factors that we cannot really control. So I think it's a very difficult time globally, and now we're talking about how can we make ends meet. So we're not even talking about education. How can we survive? So it's a very, very difficult period. And that's why we need to really work together. And I think a collective action is really key to solve any kind of problems, especially now. So I think this kind of the current talk and the effort to revisit and restructure and is a very, very important. But at the same time, we know that as implementing the certain ideas and plans are very, very difficult and a lot of unknown factors. So I think we're going in the right direction, in my opinion. Yes.
Just talk to me a bit about that factor of implementing, because you've mentioned it, you know, just a bit. And oftentimes, especially when it comes to our own country, we keep saying all the time that the problem is not the policy, the problem is not the idea, even the system may not really quite be the problem is just the implementation process. How do we move past idea and actually actualizing what's on paper?
Yes, that's as you know, that collective action is very difficult for any society, and I think the devolution, the current effort is a very good way of implementing all the good ideas we have. And especially I like the way the county is in charge of the primary, the pre-education, and the upper level is more focused on the primary and secondary. So there is a clear division about what to do, and so that kind of clear division of tasks and operation and implementation is very important. So I think it will be a successful track this year.
All right, I hear you. The former, or the previous system, I should say, was as it's been termed, you know, mostly centered on churning out individuals who can compete in the job market. Is this one of those things that you equally share in terms of idea, and perhaps largely what was the undoing of the previous system?
I think everybody around the world is linked to the international system these days. So it's important to have, you know, job growth in Kenya, but also to connect students and graduates with international companies. And I would say the recent success of attracting companies such as Microsoft or Amazon, Visa, shows that Kenya can compete and is competing in that market, and has in the past produced the right graduates. But I think what we need to look at is how, as a nation, can the standards be increased. So it's not only looking at the top talent in Kenya and making sure that, you know, international companies are attracted to Kenya. It's how do you make sure that no child is left behind, to quote former President Obama. So when I look at the KCSE results, for example, it's great that we have top performers, but what about the performers people don't talk about? What about the, you know, lowest performers, or the, you know, the third quintile? That's where you have to really have policies that raise standards for Kenya, because a lot of growth has to also come internally from Kenya. It's not only about attracting foreign companies. How do you know, nurture domestic industries, and how do you build manufacturing companies and service companies that provide jobs for Kenyans? That can not only be done through international investment, it has to be driven largely from Kenyan companies.
So then, Mr. Miller, what do we do about this? Because you talked about the top talent, not just focusing on them, how we can also leverage on everyone, not just taking a select few who would attract foreign companies or foreign investors. And you also talked about the 2021 KCSE, which just happened last year. And right now, even as we speak, in next month, you're looking at, you know, the other final exam. But then less focus is normally put on those that don't really quite perform, which is what you touched. How do we go about that then?
I think you have to go back to that data issue. We have to understand better why, you know, a large number of students, sadly, are not performing too well in their primary or secondary education. So what are the reasons driving that? Is it because of, you know, a lack of teacher training? Is it a lack of facilities? Is it a lack of parental support? Education is a very difficult business because a lot of factors come together to produce a successful student who knows how to navigate the world. Yes. And the world starts in Kenya. So I think what is necessary is a comprehensive review at the local level in each county, and understand the dynamics of each county better and how education is delivered or not delivered in some cases, and then have tailored, localized solutions. That, I think, is key. And that's where devolution comes in, of course. And we really hope that with the new government, devolution is, used as a key to deliver services effectively to students, because the students are the future of Kenya.
Sure.
And you can't fail the students.
I hear you. Dr. Rosa, in your interaction, even as you came up with forming of the Sochin Institute, perhaps for this 5 years or even more, what has been what you've seen out there? What has been what you've seen out there in the market in terms of students not performing quite well? What is the problem?
So through the Sochin Research Institute, I had a very invaluable experience of meeting the people who are experts but who are not really well known to the media and the outside world, but they are experts in their special field. And also, we didn't just focus on education per se, because I feel the education is intricately related and connected to other parts of society. So like Mr. Miller already suggested, I focus on data and evidence to have the right inquiry about the current situation. And things are not as bleak and pessimistic as a lot of people think. And for instance, you get not a really great result from the KCSE. But on the other hand, we get a lot of amazing results from the TVETs. Their products are amazing. And when I had opportunity to work with the patent office and the technology inventions, I realized that there are amazing talents in Kenya across all the youths we're talking about. And so the results, the data that we get on the newspaper may not be the right indicator and to really assess what's going on, because we have to really understand what has happened in the past and what's going on now, and then we can plan for the future, better future. Everybody wants a better future, right? But we have to understand that do we want a better future in a way that, do you want to nurture children who grow up to be independent in their thinking, and they take the initiative to look for what they want, instead of being tamed to some kind of bureaucratic or didactic kind of a scheme of understanding things, which is, in my opinion, it's very outdated idea. The latter is very outdated to the current changes that are taking place. So things are, in my opinion, very positive when you look at all the factors around, but we need a better indexes and indicators to have a more meaningful conversation, instead of just working on the outdated data that means nothing. So,
exactly. That's why I wanted to get your perspective, because then you are on ground to just tell us exactly how things are there. Because oftentimes you tend to think that those at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of performance forms the bulk and the chunk, and like there's no hope and future for them. But what we are getting from is that actually there's more to those results at the end of the day. And we'll come to TVETs momentarily, but then before we get to TVETs, let's come to the technology bit of it. How do we leverage on technology to sort of like shift and shape and change our education system or sector in terms of restrategizing, Mr. Miller?
I think technology has a huge role to play in education. It cannot substitute the traditional classroom, but it has to complement the classroom. So some steps have been already taken to deliver ICT lessons in classrooms, to connect students with the internet, things like that. And I think you have to then look beyond just the infrastructure issue. So are the teachers qualified to have deliver meaningful ICT lessons? Are there good exercises students do? We always hear about amazing programming schools and coding here in Kenya, but let's see if we can devolve that to the lower levels. And again, not just look at the top performers, but really imbue skills early on to students. So I think it takes time, and maybe the training has to happen at the national level and then devolve to the county level. But I think that really starts with the teachers. You can't have good ICT development among students without good facilities, the right infrastructure, and properly trained teachers. And you have to then also make sure that the teachers understand how technology is influencing our daily lives. And again, it's not just about the programmers who work for these high-tech companies. How can you apply technology to better agricultural practices? How can you develop marketplaces to sell goods? And if you slowly inculcate students with this kind of thinking, then I think technology can be leveraged and can really magnify the impact it has on the Kenyan economy.
So then it needs to start from the top level as it cascades down.
A little bit. I think you really have to nurture both dynamics at the same time.
Okay.
A lot of growth can happen also from the ground level up.
All right.
And not everything
the bottom
is,
up, as we say.
Exactly, bottom up, right? So I think really you have to nurture both sides, the top down and the bottom up. In the past, you had industrial policies, maybe in the 70s and 80s in the Tiger Nations, which were top down, and that worked for those countries. But everybody talks about the bottom-up approach here. And Kenya is a very entrepreneurial, dynamic country. And that should be taken advantage of and nurtured. And then let's see what happens if you actually have both approaches, top-down and bottom-up.
See what works best and then capitalize on that one.
Exactly.
All right, I hear you. The CS nominee for Education, Ezekiel Machogu, last week while being vetted, touched a bit on this issue of internet and technology, that if appointed to this position, this is something he will look into, try to see how every part of this country will be able to have access to that, so that every child and student can benefit from that. What I want to get from you, Dr. Rosa, is that how practical is this? And given that you're someone in this kind of space, what recommendations would you give so that this one actually gets to reach far and wide?
Yeah, so if you read our paper, I hope you have a chance to get into our website, our Sochin Research Institute, Facebook, and we do have Twitter account. We published quite a lot of papers in regard to the government resources for EdTech related resources they can provide. It's very fairly easy to think about providing technology as a simple resource. Just give it to the student, as many students as you can do. You provide iPhones or technology-related desktops or any kind of devices. You would think that make you connected to the world. But as you know, that simplified resource form may not be what we need. But it has to be done. It has to be done. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, we had to do other things under the umbrella of providing these simple resources as internet technology to all over the country. That's a good idea, but at the same time, once we have the technology from a child or a parent point of view, there is a lot of disadvantages and harm that come with that connection, right? So there are so much dangers and hacking, and there are a lot of nefarious activities happening because of the internet. So those are safety, measurements, and constantly being alert and how to navigate correctly all this information overload that we have is very, very important. But just giving out the tablets and the devices, I don't think it's a good idea, but at the same time, it has to be done. So we have a very long way to go in terms of how to take advantage of technology in the current education system. Yes.
I hear you. So giving out the tablets or the phones could be a good idea, but maybe not a good place to start from?
I mean, we have to start from that point. We have no doubt. I mean, we cannot be lag behind other countries. That's where everybody's going. So we have to do it. And also the Kenya is the technology hub in East Africa. So we have to be at the forefront of it. So the current efforts are all good, and it's the correct way. But at the same time, we have to do other measures concurrently to make sure that it goes in the right direction and all the right devices do its own, our planned benefits for the children. Yes.
So just very quickly, what are some of these things that we need to sort of bring on board? Because you talked about we need to do sort of other things for them to go concurrently and in tandem for us to achieve the goal?
First of all, we did when we did the Sochin Research Institute, we received grant from the U.S. Embassy in Kenya to launch 500 vulnerable youth cybersecurity training.
Okay.
So identifying the vulnerable youth was not as easy as people hoped. We did it scientifically. I identified the people who use a lot of internet and they are very connected. So they tend to bring. There's a high risk of bringing harm to society. So we identified those vulnerable youth for this program. In the process, I realized that cybersecurity training is very, very imperative even for small children and also for the parents and guardians and teachers. So that's probably the first thing we need to do, to have a very solid cybersecurity training and about the internet and technology. Yes.
I like that. Train first, then now you can give, so that people can also have a good understanding of what exactly it is that you're giving them. And I really have seen you agreeing quite a lot with what Dr. Rosa is saying there, Mr. Miller. Nonetheless, still sticking on that issue of technology, because it's really quite one of those quite pertinent topics to discuss. And again, the previous government had also, sort of begun such kind of a program, and this was cut out in the whole period that they were supposed to be in government, 2013 to 2022, but we only saw a small section of Kenyans students getting this laptop. Is it a time where we need to start revisiting this project again, and perhaps how different would we do it?
Well, of course you have to revisit projects and look at the lessons learned. Look at the failures, and you have to be honest about it. So I don't want to go into the specifics of this project. I'm not an expert in this anyway.
Sure.
But I think the idea was the correct one. You have to give students or the people the tools. And that's what technology is. It's a tool. Technology doesn't generate things by itself. It's a means to an end. And I think it's an interesting cause and effect relationship too. You have to have the technology there, so you have to distribute maybe devices, you have to establish fiber optic lines, give people the infrastructure to then use the tools appropriately. But it's also very easy to misuse these tools. I mean, we just came out of the election period recently where disinformation and misinformation was rampant during the election. And unfortunately, the technology tool was misused in that sense. So it's not about only presenting tools and solutions, but it's also teaching people the right use, the right ethics behind using technology, the right productivity means. It's about nurturing entrepreneurship and see how a new business idea can be implemented through technology. So it's not just a simple matter of providing resources, it's how do you use these resources? And I think then again, you have to start with the measurement aspect, like we've heard many times. What is the situation analysis? What are the industries that can benefit from the technology? And how do I relate that to the people and have them implement it? So it's about using tools better, more effectively, more productively. So the technology education really is quite holistic, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay, I hear you. So then what is the place of teachers in all of this? Because you can talk about how important it is to even deliver these tools, much as all of you have said that it's important for us to start at a point of understanding about these tools at the end of the day. But what is the place of training, and even particularly for those that will be administering these tools to these children or kids or students at the end of the day?
I think teachers have to instill a lifelong desire to learn.
All right.
So they really have to kind of ignite the spark and the curiosity in kids, in young learners. And that requires a lot of effort among teachers. It requires teachers to also be holistic thinkers and to think about application of technology. So I think teachers have a large burden to some extent, large shoes to fill, because it's not easy. But learning is a lifelong experience, and it has to be taught that way. And I think teachers have to find the students.
And an everyday activity.
Exactly.
Every day you learn something.
Every day you learn something. It doesn't stop in adulthood either.
Yes.
It's really every day and up until you're 50, 60, 70 years old. You have to constantly adapt. So teachers somehow have to instill that desire, that spark, that creativity in the students' minds. Maybe it doesn't happen with every student. I mean, as a teacher, it's very difficult to impart things equally among the whole classroom. But if you can identify a few change makers in that class who then go on and create multiplier effects as they get older and impact society as their business ventures get bigger and bigger, then the teacher has done their job very, very successfully.
All right. So then this is just a holistic kind of approach that we need to get into some of these issues. All right, Dr. Rosa, even as you touch on the policy, restrategizing, there's some quarters that are saying, as we talked about earlier, policies might not really be quite the biggest of issues. And again, also when you look at the system of education in our country, in some parts, you'd get 1 to 60. So 1 teacher to 60 students. In some places, it's even 1 to 70. And some of these teachers are even poorly remunerated. So then is this some of these things that we need to be looking into to perhaps strategize the entire education sector? What would you speak to this?
Do you know how many students I had? I grew up in South Korea, and I moved to U.S. As an immigrant family, South Korean immigrant family when I was in high school. And at that time, we still do. We have a 633 system, 6 years of primary school, and at that time they call it elementary school, and 3 years of middle school, and 3 years of high school. And we had 80 students in class. We had 80.
Against 1 teacher?
Yes. Yes. So
then this is an issue that actually comes across there.
So I tell my stories to my Kenyan college students and high school students. They just drop out of chair, like, how can you teach for 80 students? It's doable.
How do you even know the name of each of these students?
We do know. I still communicate with some of my high school friends, even the middle school. It's not a really good idea to think that there's a perfect ratio for the teacher to student, and realistically we know that that's not possible in Kenya. so I don't think it's good to really push for a discussion that's not realistically possible. I'm a very realistic person, so my way of viewing things is what can we do most given the system we have, and we have a lot of obstacles. But there's no perfect system and there's no perfect solution. But at the same time, the mindset is very important. The teachers have the important mindset about education, also the students. But at the same time, the parents have a huge role in the whole scheme. And so I cannot say, of course, if you have a small ratio of teachers to students, that's the ideal thing. But I realize that I feel like I'm looking at the Korea in 1980s, even like 1990s, when I look at my students in the high school, even colleges. So, but at the time, I had a lot of fun. Still, despite I got my PhD in the U.S. with all the 80 to 1 the teacher student to teacher ratio from Korea. So I'm very proud of my heritage, and of course a lot of bad things happened. There were a lot of things, the negative things that affect any society, any school system. But despite of all that, I still had a very good education, I believe. All public school. I never went to a private. And so the teacher-student ratio is a very important issue that we need to tackle. But at the same time, before we do that, we have to find out, do we have a good training for the teachers? Do we have a good curriculum in place for the students? Do we have, despite all the hardships and obstacles we have, do we have a still learning environment, the people, for the students and teachers and parents to feel positive about the whole situation?
I hear you. This is actually a conversation I would have wanted us to extrapolate a bit, but I can hear my director say that we are almost getting pinched for time. And I wouldn't want us to exit without touching on the issue of TVETs. Why? Because also in our very own country, we've had some technical institutions being upgraded to universities. The very famous one is the Kenya Polytechnic, now Technical University of Kenya. Is this one of those good moves, and does it change the dynamics of it being a technical institute? Mr. Miller, what are your thoughts on this one?
My thoughts would be that there might be too many universities in Kenya. So we have a split between public and private universities, and across the board it seems like most universities are having budgetary issues, which makes me wonder, as a finance person myself, if this system is sustainable. And it's very good to have aspirations to have a university degree and to use it as a ticket to success. However, I think incredible skills and innovations come from TVETs. So I would actually say you have to emphasize that system and help those students more, because somebody who graduates from a TVET has incredible skills to maybe open up a small, medium-sized enterprise and create jobs and employment for people.
All right.
And a university student may not be able to do that.
I feel like I've cut you short of that one, but due to the interest of time, you have to finish at this point. Nonetheless, thank you so much, lady and gent, for making time. Dr. Rosa to my extreme left, who is the founder, Sochin Research Institute and Core Academy. Right next to her is Mr. Noah Miller, equally also founder, Sochin Research Institute and Core Academy, largely just looking at some of those policy gaps, restrategizing the education sector in our country. Good place to end this conversation, and ultimately, good morning, Kenya. I'm Doreen Okello on behalf of the entire team. Asante sana. Till tomorrow, good morning.